Hello, my name is CJ Wren, and today I'll be demonstrating the Cantai AI Vocalist. I'll be demonstrating this both as a Dorico user using music XML files that are generated, and I will also be demonstrating exporting music XMLs from Musescore, but also using the brand new built-in AI Vocalist render that they just released for Musescore using Cantai. Overall, the goal of this video is to demonstrate where this project is at, who this product is targeted towards, and should you put your money into it right now. Let's get started. To get started, I'll be working with this original piece called Peace by John McLaughlin. He's a composer based in Pittsburgh who I've been helping make AI mockups for his website and YouTube. And in this case, I'm provided a file that is a .mxl, and this is an export from Finale. I'm not quite sure what version. All I know is this is what I received. And my first intuition was to get subscribed to Cantai and then try to upload this MXL. But you'll see it's not compatible. So we can only work with music XML, XMLs, MIDI, or MID, which is another MIDI file. But this is all right because I'm already going to be taking his scores and I'm going to be turning them into Dorico files anyway. So let's open up this MXL in Dorico and get it ready for Cantai. The end goal of the Cantai app is to have built-in renders or plugins for Musescore, Sibelius, and Dorico. Currently though, that is not an option, but I have access to the online render. This is why I need to edit my score in Dorico and then export the file for rendering. Now that I've got this file open up, let's look for some things that are going to be immediate issues, and this is just because of the music XML import. I like to work backwards, and looking at this, there's some things that look wrong and we will be fixing them, but there are some big catches to this. First, we can't do multi parts on a single staff. This means every single staff has to have only one part. It has to be monophonic, and if you have a split staff, you have to have a separate staff for that to render. To begin to fix this, since there's doubles in I believe every single staff, I will duplicate every staff and then manually get rid of the second layer. Now work my way through the score, finding every part where there is a double and then eliminating it and putting it into the second staff. For example here, I will cut out the bottom notes, copy over the lyrics and dynamics, and then continue copying in the main passage until I have another double. Now, while I complete this process in a time lapse in the background, let me talk about the target audience of this product and where I believe it's going to go and why I believe it's pretty important. First, you'll notice Cantai.app is not the most polished product yet. It is a single developer-led project or maybe a couple developers, but the point is it's a small project, it's very affordable, and it's offering a feature set that none of the other AI vocal rendering tools really offer, in my opinion, at this level. Cantai.app was clearly made to favor classical solo vocals and choral vocals, and you can achieve that in some of the other renders, but it's not as fluid and it's not necessarily good sounding. They definitely have a pop skew to them, and I've very much noticed this using Synth V. Now, my opinion is that Synth V sounds the most natural, to the point I can trick people and clients into thinking it's someone real. Obviously, it's always for demos and I disclose it, but it's kind of funny to see them say, wow, I really couldn't tell. Cantai is definitely getting closer to being more realistic. Its other choir counterpart, a studio. I tried to use a studio for this exact project in these scores, and it really wasn't that feasible. I'm not going to cover that in depth now because I will make a separate video on that. But Cantai is a small project solving a problem that a small target audience has. Now that this process is done, you'll notice that was very tedious. The fact that it doesn't support the divisi parts is definitely a pain sometimes, but that does not mean it's really its fault, because really it can only interpret one note at a time. You'll also notice I was getting rid of stray rests such as these. I don't know those actually cause problems, but I can foresee them based on some of the experience I've had, that anything extra that isn't just the purest form of the notes, the music, and the dynamics can interfere with the generation. So while I'm at it, I'm going to assign every single staff to have only one single upstem voice. The next thing I want to do is I want to remove my piano from this score. That way when I'm uploading it, it's only getting the vocal parts. I don't want this to throw any confusion into the mix. That's easy on Dorico. Just jump to your sub tab with your full score check. Just uncheck your piano. So now let's do a file export of this. We'll be doing a MusicXML, and note, we need to be doing the .musicxml, not a .mxl, which is the compressed. The .mxl is what I originally received, and obviously I was able to open it up in Dorico. I was not able to open that in Cantai. To make my life easy, I'm only going to export the full score XML. That way it has all my parts on there, and it should render audio files for each one. Make sure you're dumping this somewhere you can find it. Click OK. This brings us over to the Cantai web render. Let's navigate to that MusicXML we just made. Open it. Select your language. It only supports 2, English and Latin, which is one of the main reasons I use Cantai, is because this project with AI mockups I'm doing with my friend John McLaughlin, he had some Latin in one of his scores. This one's all in English. Click process. And what is this? File processing failed, unable to process because there's no tempo markings found in the score. Now, I knew this was going to happen, but I just did this as a proof of concept. You have to have explicit tempo markings. You can't just have tempo text. And we already went through this whole process of making a dedicated Dorico file to export MusicXML, so it's not such a big deal. Just select your tempo markings and come down to the properties and check this metronome mark shown. This it can interpret. The text it cannot. I'm also removing some stray text in the process. Now it's not able to interpret this A tempo. So what can we do is pick the original tempo you're supposed to be setting. I believe this is actually referring to the andante at coordinates 80 because the 66 just happened and that was the slowdown. So I will make that assumption, but I will check with the composer obviously. Shift T, Q equals 80. And that is the rest of the tempo markings. Now let's do the MusicXML export and let's see if it works in the Cantai web render. Do I want to overwrite this? Yes, I do. Back to the web render, click upload, find your file, select your language, and process. Let's see what we get. At this point, we can see it's correctly interpreting each staff that I had in my MusicXML file, so that's perfect. Let's select the type of vocalist we want. In this case, I'm going to be using the choir vocals. So drop down and select each one. Now let's turn up our choir section size to what you think is appropriate, and remember this is currently doubled. So this soprano 1 and this soprano 2, that's the same part except with the divisi. So let's do 4 each for each of these. Once all your settings are correct, click start rendering. The rendering process, especially with choral rendering, takes a little bit of time, but honestly, it doesn't take nearly as long as you would expect, especially with my experience with a studio, which would hang in a couple spots, but I can only assume that was a bug. Now that these are done rendering, just play one of them and see if it sounds like it's working. You can also check the final mix. I personally be downloading the stems and then remixing them, but this is what this sounds like. Not bad, except I think the panning is not perfect, which is why I do the stems myself. Next step is download each of these files and put them somewhere where you won't lose them. Once all of these are downloaded, I am going to drop them into my DAW. In this case, I'll be using Nuendo 14 or Cubase. What's cool if you're working with Dorico in Cubase is if you had an accompaniment such as a piano or other VSTs, you can now import those into Cubase or Nuendo directly by opening a Dorico file, which is pretty awesome. And it will also sync all your tempo and all that. And as someone that almost always does my really good sounding mockups inside of Cubase, this is a great feature. The Dorico Cubase integration is killer for this. Now I've got the stems dropped into my DAW. Let me name these tracks so I can keep easier track. I like to put all my choir stuff into one single bus and folder. I use a macro to do that. Obviously this is a cappella, so it doesn't really matter, but if for some reason I had accompaniment, it would make more sense, so I have control over just the vocals. Now I'll pan these left and right to create some depth and width to my final mix. With my panning, I'm not trying to replicate a real space or how the group might actually be standing. Instead, I'm trying to balance out the two parts so they equally fill my audible space left and right, and it makes it really appealing to listen to. Let's just click play and see what we got. So one thing that's immediately sticking out to me is the word time. It's supposed to be time instead of getting time. This is something I've noticed with XML exports from Dorico. Sometimes it can't interpret how long the word is supposed to be, but I found that if I export it from Musescore, it might work. While this does add an extra step, all it really involves is opening this project and then exporting it again, and it seems to understand better coming from Musescore, and I would assume that's because that's the focus. That's their first integration they're really going for, and once they get the Musescore stuff down, the better compatibility will be coming to Dorico and Sibelius MusicXML exports, and I actually will be sending these two different MusicXML exports for the dev to look at. He asked for them earlier, right around Thanksgiving, but I unfortunately got busy with finals and school and all that. But we have this. Let's export our MusicXML, and we can't use compressed. Remember, you have to use .musicxml. I wouldn't mess with the .xml, which is, as it says, outdated. I'll export the main score, which is what we're seeing on the page now, and not the individual parts. Click export. Let's repeat this rendering process, but with the Musescore MXL file. There was a rendering error, and I believe it's because of this double weird text thing, the Andante, and it put a quarter note, then it put another quarter note on the MusicXML import, so I'm manually fixing these. I believe this should fix the issue. Let me re-export this and see if this fixes my issue. The issue seems to have been those weird double tempo markings that are now fixed. It was just because of the MusicXML import into Finale. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves and download all these, let's see if this fixed the word time. So this is currently a bug, I suppose, and I'm sharing it with the developers, so I imagine it will get fixed very quick. But for some reason, it's just better at understanding the MusicXML exports from Musescore. But as you can see, all I have to do is take all my work in Dorico and just run it through Musescore one time, and then we're good. This will also bring us to the next part of the video right after we adjust this mix just slightly, where we use the built-in rendering in Musescore and see where it's at. Back to my DAW, I'm going to dump all the correct files on here. Now let's click play, see where we're at, and then we'll do a little bit of adjusting to the mix before we try out the Musescore built-in rendering. So in this example, one thing I've noticed with the Cantai web render, and actually every single AI vocalist, I don't know what it is, they all fall off the notes. They go, ah, on every single end of phrase. And I don't know what to do to prevent that. Now, what I can do to remedy it is, especially if you have something like Very Audio or Melodyne, I'll open up all these tracks in Very Audio. So I selected them all and I enabled it. It's going to process all the files, and then I'll be able to straighten them out and slightly adjust the pitch. And I found that this pretty much fixes all the over expressiveness of the Cantai app, and it also gets rid of all the weird pitch falls, and I can also fix a couple select spots here and there. With all these processed, I will just generally for now select them all, and I will adjust my correct pitch slightly and then straighten curve a decent amount. There are some spots where I don't want to do that, and obviously I would go through the score, but for the purpose of the video, this will suffice. Let's jump to a spot in the middle. Starting to sound pretty good, right? One thing I will do to each track is put a de-esser on them. I find that this tends to have a lot of tss sounds going on. I'm not really tweaking this. I'm just doing a general de-essing up at the top here. I might have to adjust its threshold. Next, I roll off the low frequencies. There tends to be this kind of low rumble to these samples, and that's not going to affect the vocals at all, but it gets rid of some of the extra noise. Now I'll run it through a compressor. If I'm really feeling it, I can throw some saturation on there. Helps warm up the tone. And finally, I'll throw a reverb on. I could do this as sends on each channel. For now, I'm just going to throw it on the choir bus and adjust my mix knob. Pick something that sounds realistic based on where you think this piece would get actually performed. In this case, I'll be picking a church, and I will do the warm church. Now we have this super wide, pretty good sounding choir, and this is all AI. And we did this starting with a MXL file from an old version of Finale, mind you. Put in the Dorico, adjusted it, we had to run it through Musescore that one time, but I imagine that will be fixed pretty soon, especially after I send over this video and the 2 MusicXML files so the dev can analyze them. Honestly, I'm pretty impressed, especially as someone who wants to be editing my final stems in a DAW anyway, because I'm looking for this certain level of control. This is how I'm going to opt to do it, even though I have access to the Musescore built-in rendering system. Now, that's bringing up that Musescore built-in rendering. Let's hop over to Musescore and let's see what happens if we weren't to have exported the MusicXML from here and instead use the built-in rendering. So I've jumped over to that MusicXML that I imported into Musescore. I forgot to click record, but what I did is I opened my mixer, and then under the sound drop down, you can now see your Musescores, Cantai, choir, and then select what kind. There's also all the solo instruments. Note, this is only accessible to you if you subscribe through the Muse Hub, which I subscribed and planning on to pay for a month since I have it already on the web render. Now I'm having a little bit of a difficult time getting it to render, so I might try to restart Musescore and also the Muse Hub and see if that helps. Processing online sounds, and now it's showing me a little checkbox with an exclamation mark. That probably isn't good. Okay, we got something happening, but it seems to have quit again. So I've given up trying to make this work on my desktop. I'm going to try it on my laptop, and hopefully it's just some kind of configuration issue, something with my system. You can hear on the laptop, what I'm seeing is what I was expecting to see on my desktop. What it's saying is it can't reach my server on my desktop, and I'm not sure what kind of configuration would be causing that because I was using the same network, and really, I don't think there's anything different. So in the meantime, I'll let this run, and then we will check it and see how it sounds. The rendering is all done, and I would say the way I did this is probably a special use case. In general, you're supposed to render as you write, and then it renders in small chunks, as you can see, highlighting each section in purple. That's the audio file it renders and plays. Obviously, since I just opened this file and assigned my instruments, it went through and rendered the whole thing, but all in all, it only took a few minutes, and eventually they're going to add support for local rendering, which could potentially speed things up if your internet was a bottleneck. Now, most importantly, how's it sound?
All that's written, all means strength, but peace.
So this playback is pretty impressive, and as you're noticing, it's a smoother experience than the MusicXML right now. Obviously, there are plugins planned for Dorico and Sibelius, so that will be remedied at some point. But now that you have the option, you can just get the subscription for Cantai in the Musescore Hub, export your MusicXMLs from either of those, and then you have a little more control over it in Musescore, and I think that's a pretty powerful feature. Basically for me, if I want to write choral scores and choral parts, I can just treat Musescore like my dedicated choir rendering tool. What I'm noticing as the biggest advantage to playback in this is it plays the variable tempos, the retardanos, and the fermatas. The MusicXML doesn't seem to do that, so I've been manually adding that in as necessary, but this is a game changer, and that's obviously something that would be brought in with plugin support for Dorico and Sibelius. Now, it's time for my final thoughts on Cantai. Cantai is clearly an early development product, but as early development as it is, it's pretty awesome. It truly is the only renderer I've seen that really makes sense for choir, especially if you're looking for that more traditional choir sound. The other ones, they sort of don't really have the voices that sound appropriate for the styles. It's clear to me that the developer really wanted to make this product because he has to be passionate about this, and it's pretty phenomenal the work he's done. So should you buy into Cantai now? One way to start using it is to get it in the Musescore Hub for $15 a month, or you can buy a one-time purchase license that's currently on sale, but this is for a pre-release edition. In my opinion, if you write a lot of choir music, and based on what I'm seeing in the Musescore version of the Cantai render, I think you should just buy it, help support the developer, and you'll get access to the online render. And based on the promises this project has already delivered, I have really high hopes for the Sibelius and Dorico editions. With that being my final recommendation, I appreciate you watching this video, and I hope I have pointed you in the right direction on whether or not you want to support this project. I plan to cover some of the other AI vocal tools, kind of as a counterpart part or a series to this video. If you want to see those and more Composer technology-based tools, Dorico videos, compositional videos, and some music releases, make sure you hit subscribe, leave a like, and comment what you think about Cantai down in the comments. Thank you so much for your support, and see you in the next one.